122. That is the number of small jagged teeth edging inside Taelyn's mouth. 122. Tiny but sinfully capable, each horn-shaped tooth is 1/4 of an inch long, with upward-pointing serrations on front and back edges. These structures, otherwise known as denticles, are unusual for carnivore teeth, but are common in plant-eating dinosaurs. Also atypical is the shape of her mouth. Ending in a broad U, the blunted face of Senonicosaurus is similar to that of modern iguanas, one of the few remaining herbivorous reptiles on your world. This collection of evidence has led experts to believe that Stenonicosaurus evolved to be omnivorous, willing to harvest the flesh of both animals and plants. Inside the cloaked opening, Taelyn is immediately overwhelmed by Calto. A tsunami of gloss washes over her feathered body, and she can barely see over the dense green bush. Up ahead, the Omega can see an enclosed valley surrounded on 3 sides by hills. As the others make their way in, they are similarly engulfed by green's fullness. The vibrancy is unexpected to the point of paralysis, and most surprising of all is the spark of lust for the Glossopteris. Fleshy green tongues lapping over their charcoal dark feathers, the hearty vegetation offers an intimate welcome to the withered wolves. A form of Calto foreplay, the pleasing stimulation draws the pack inward, their jaws dripping with want. Stepping into the central meadow, the Senonicosaurus sample grass leaves as they walk, and each are delighted by their moisture and sweetness. The juicy refreshment is timely after crossing the open steppe, and they share glances of surprise and pleasure. Chewing cuts through Calto's alienness, and the pack's xenophobia fades with their dry mouth. Beginning to wonder if green gloss is all this enchanted jungle has to offer, Taelyn's newly enhanced eyes catch movement up ahead. Freezing in place, her double-barreled focus activates and pulls her head to zero in on the source. The Omega's hesitation causes the others to pause their snacking, and wet hunks of gloss drop from their ragged mouths. It takes a chip, but the younger wolves eventually notice the same patch of ruffling leaves. Whatever it is seems to be short, but the Omega is wary of what she cannot see. Removing the distraction of green, Taelyn caps her twin laser scopes. Her mind in darkness, she detects the distinct sound of chewing. The noise is pacifying and alters the balance of chemicals in her brain. Prey. A mixture of cortisol and adrenaline have kept her anxiety at a rolling boil since stepping into Calto, but these new auditory signals are familiar and stabilizing. Her sensory neurons release neurotransmitters, including acetylcholine, glutamate, and GABA, redirecting the Omega's fear of uncertainty and exciting her predatory instincts. Targets acquired. The Omega lifts her missile silo eyelids to reveal twin red-tipped tomahawks. She makes for the shuffling leaves, her gait accelerating from cautious to cunning. Flaming spheres locked on, her sickle claws click with anticipation. Long, slender legs glide between the bushes, and she crouches to pick up speed. Sacrificing stealth as she charges through the gloss, Taelyn opens her edges and she commits to her target, whatever it may be. The pack has lost sight of their Omega and are startled when the brush suddenly explodes, as if it were impacted by a comet. Taelyn's hand claws sink into the pillowed flesh, and both creatures tumble in a mixed somersault. Hooking blades finding the abdomen, she makes parallel incisions down the animal's belly. Spinning like a salad bowl, the luckless Listosaurus is disemboweled as they come to rest. Organs and blood splatter cover the green gloss, but Taelyn's raven black feathers are clean. The Omega is stunned by her own swiftness and doesn't immediately devour the still twitching muscle. The animal offered no resistance, and only now can Taelyn appreciate its true form. Roughly her body length, but denser and on 4 legs, it has a flat face with a short pair of tusks. Lying next to her kill, Taelyn's body is below the bush line. Baffled by the brevity of their Omega's assault, the pack steps forward cautiously, the wolves unsure what to expect. Jago eventually machetes through the brush, breaking Taelyn's days of observation. The eviscerated carcass is haloed by cut from its filled stomach, and the pack leader is initially hesitant to harvest. Not sharing her restraint, the opportunistic male briefly locks eyes with his Omega and then leaps at the fresh organs. Cleaving in shortly thereafter, Orchid and Jazz trade clueless glances with their mother. Protective of her supremacy, the loyal daughters emit a guttural chirp and charge at Jago. He pauses his gorging to release a chirp of his own, but is tackled by the sisters. Pushed out of the fighting pit, Jago scratches at whatever he can, determined to assert dominance wherever he can. The feathery fight abruptly stops when the Omega unleashes the irritated shriek of an ill-tempered seahawk. Settling the skirmish before it can escalate, Taelyn's audible strike is as wicked as her claws and cuts just as deeply. The trinity of zealots look up from their tussle and see their leader back on her feet, the phoenix a periscope above the bush line. Orchid and Jazz spring to meet their mother's gaze, but Jago does not. More interested in the certainty in front of him, the lone male is not tempted by whatever is behind door number 2. Unencumbered, he resumes harvesting the Lystrosaurus, smearing the outside of his body with the insides of another. Eyes above the low-lying canopy, the females are immersed in a living sea of emerald green. Shuffling in the gloss under Thea's golden afterlight, the grazing Lystrosaurus appears whitecaps on the meadow's surface. Frosted breakers in a tiny ocean, the swells of prey fill the central pasture, extending into the hills and everywhere. In all directions, as far as Calto will let them see, they are surrounded by sustenance. It is a level of richness the phoenix has never seen, and to think all hidden from the steppe. It isn't an ocean, but a barrel of fish, and they gunslingers. The pack don't find the spiked necks until after they have eaten and rested. At high Z of the following cycle, the wolves need liquid water, and they begin exploring the foreign terrain around them. Dark clouds have rolled in over the hills, and Taelyn wants out of Calto's lowlands. The gloss has been carved into a veritable corn maze by the Listral gardeners, and the Omega wills the pack to higher ground. Caught off guard, they stumble upon Katie and Zai tucked inside a foothill crevice. Their stomachs well stuffed, the wolves had all but forgotten what brought them to Calto. Seeing the spiny whip-tailed creature sparks visions of Caesar inside Taelyn's hippocampus, an area of the brain associated with memory. Bitterly reminded of the sacrifice the silverback demanded, the daymare stirs up her amygdala, a brain region adjacent to the hippocampus, responsible for controlling emotion. Her heart bleeds for Kano, and her mind is humbled by his power. The phoenix is still settling, and fear tells the Omega to avoid the armed titans. Double backing leads the pack away from the roosting pair and allows Taelyn's emotions to settle. Her head clear, she imprints the nest location in her mind and commits to only returning if necessary, and not without the cover of true night. Past danger, the pack changes formation. Orchid and Jazz prong out on either side of their mother, and the male holds an aft position. A trident piercing through the rising green landscape, the females probe forward while Jago guards their 6. To the left, Orchid picks up the sound of a babbling brook and chirps to her mother. They exchange verbals, and Taelyn echoes her daughter's signal to the others. Engaged in commotion of their own, Jazz and Jago quickly silence themselves, and the foursome breaks left. Through the bush shroud, Taelyn finds a modest river. Wide but shallow, there is a rubbled bank on either side, and large rocks bridge the trickling rapids. Orchid stands below a short ledge at the river's border, respectfully waiting for her mother. Pleased with the patience of her daughter, Taelyn affectionately rubs against her favorite flower, and the two wolves begin taking in gulps of clear fluid. Cool and mysteriously enriched, the water causes Taelyn's phoenix red eyes to flicker, not to black out, but to white hot. The Omega doesn't notice the phenomenon herself, but her vigilant daughter does. Dismissing it as another mystery of the phoenix, Orchid pushes the unexplained vision out of her mind and continues hydrating. The arrival of Jazz and Jago together captures Orchid's attention, and she watches them approach the water. Each carries a degree of fill from their recent harvest, but the sister wolf senses something more. A budding intimacy between them, dirty girl and filthy boy step into the creek to clean. Exquisitely black and resting on dry earth, Taelyn scans the riverbank. Now more familiar with the phoenix, her cooling red eyes are searching. For a threat, for a challenge? Apart from the Amagosaurus, the pack seems invincible here. Food and water are stable, but the ease is unfamiliar, and the Omega doesn't trust it. In the stillness, neurotransmitters in Taelyn's brain come alive, and once again, the Senonicosaurus feels a twinge of anxiety. Her caution is validated when a lumbering heifer suddenly prances out of the brush. On the bank opposite, Taelyn can immediately tell that it is big, much bigger than the wolves put together. At closer inspection, the Omega sees that this new entrant is not prey, but a fellow predator, one with teeth and edges as real and menacing as her own. The pack seems to go unnoticed as the sizable animal moves towards the water. Its gait is irregular somehow, almost girlish for such a large creature. The Omega does not sense an immediate threat, but instincts activate inside her hypothalamus, the area of the brain associated with fight or flight response. Her body seething with anticipation, Taelyn is overcome with the desire to slaughter this oversized wolf imposter. But now carrying the phoenix, she has the presence of mind to control her urges and channel them in unspeakable ways. From her perch, Taelyn watches the Andrewsarchus gallivant into the stream and then plunge face first into the shallows. Water froths on either side of the creature's head, as if it were a child blowing bubbles in their chocolate milk. Each of the wolves are now aware of the intruder, and they freeze, their bodies dark statuettes under the partly clouded sky. When Lisa pulls her head out of the water, her eyes lock onto Taelyn's red spheres. The Omega is surprised to see no immediate reaction to the Phoenix, and is equally amazed when the Andrewsarchus dips her face back into the water, bubble blowing resumed. It is then that Xenix bursts. Spotlighting the actors with a silent blink of color, the beauty of Eclipse End funnels through the last openings of a pre-storm sky. As if absorbing the signal from above, Lisa holds her bubbling and tightens her posture. Pulling herself back up to Taelyn's gaze, the Andrewsarchus's once playful glow has now been replaced with wide-eyed alarm. This is the expression Taelyn was expecting, and the Queen and the Omega are met for the first time. It is the Queen who cracks first, releasing a battery of fleshy barks across the divide. The younger wolves remain frozen, but Taelyn rises confidently. Knowing all eyes are on her, the Omega takes her time and steps towards a nearby series of boulders that cross the stream. The Andrewsarchus mock charges in the water and then glances at the same collection of bridging stones. Watching Taelyn find sure footing, Lisa's eyes follow the dark wolf as it steps onto the first rock and then hop to a second. Standing on a stone pedestal above the dribbling water, Taelyn's red eyes once again meet the Queen's. Lisa lets out a second string of ferocious growls and then pauses in bewilderment. So far, the pack has shown no signs of aggression other than the intimidation of the Phoenix. Savoring the moment of eye lock, Taelyn holds her pose. Piercing into the Queen's caked brain, she then releases her glare with the shooting scream of a golden eagle. Similar but more focused than her twisted shriek earlier, the cue activates each of her lieutenants, and Jazz, Orchid, and Jago explode off the beach. The daughters follow their mother across the boulders and race past Taelyn's stoic pose. Further down the creek, Jago chooses an alternate path that will allow him to flank the larger Andrewsarchus. Each assassin blazing a trail of their own, the Omega pridefully watches as her wolves of war are slipped. Lisa's bewilderment snaps into panic and she attempts to turn tail. The Queen is visibly spooked and she stumbles in the water. Splashing clumsily, she manages to find her feet and make for the brush. Now on dry earth, Lisa feels the sensation of claws piercing into her back. Orchid and Jazz cling to opposite sides of the Queen's dense shoulder tissue, and the sudden sensation of pain activates the Andrewsarchus, allowing her to shed a layer of fear. With renewed focus, she shakes off one attacker, but Orchid remains gargoyled behind her head. Jazz lies crumpled on the ground, and the Andrewsarchus is tempted to trample her. Then out of her peripheral vision, the Queen notices another wolf sprinting towards her. Flustered and indecisive, Lisa pauses in a moment of weakness. Taking his collision course to the air, Jago drives his blades at the Queen's blank face. But before the cold-colored killer can tear out her eyes, a blur of mammal flesh passes between them. The charging shadow now gone, Lisa blinks and smiles in joyful confusion. Roland has heard his Queen's cries and has her attacker pinned helpless on the ground. The heavy-bodied Andrewsarchus blankets the assassin, the hopeful alpha skull captured in the King's jaws. Shifting their focus from Queen to King, Orchid and Jazz watch their pack male struggle. Experiencing a moment of indecisiveness themselves, they watch Jago's motion cease when Roland crashes through his head like a piggy bank. Dependent on his seed, the females are devastated in a nano and squeal like sirens. Meanwhile, Taelyn has made her way across the brook and has composure her daughters lack. Never won over by Jago, she is less distraught by his demise and is more interested in ending this new threat. Unnoticed by the King, she knives into Roland with her gleaming clean sights. Like a wreath, the Omega wraps her body around Roland's neck, clinging to his throat with her villainous claws. Her stealth action is swift, and no amount of thrashing will break the phoenix's grip. The sensation of blood running down her sides terminates Lisa's moment of relief, and she resumes fighting off Orchid, the queen twirling like a rodeo bull. Distracted by her mother's strike, the devoted daughter allows herself to be discarded, and she crash lands near her sister. Springing up with boxes spunk, the daughters are ready to fight, but are not sure who or how. Dumbfounded watching their mother cling to Roland's neck, they are mesmerized by the Omega's domination of the king. Free but wounded, the female Andrewsarchus ends her cycloning and steadies herself. Shaking off the dizziness, she is prepared to flee into the gloss, but doesn't. Catching the whites of Roland's eyes, she sees him glaring at the sister wolves who harassed his queen. Knowing that he is blind to his actual attacker, Lisa painfully stares into the true face of her king's terror, a red-eyed shadow boa knifed around his neck. When Roland's eyes finally meet the queen, she is paralyzed by their vulnerability. This is the last time she will ever see into his living soul, and her only wish is that she be taken instead. Blood gouges out of Roland's neck, soaking Taelyn's black feathers. The male Andrewsarchus chomps and cracks at the Omega, but her positioning is excellent, and he can do little more than gurgle. Taelyn knows she has won, but the Phoenix won't release until the victim goes limp. The female Andrewsarchus remains a credible threat, but the Omega has confidence that her daughters can keep the clumsy heifer occupied. Closing her red scope, she chokes out the last of King Roland's death rattle. Sensing their mother's victory, Jazz and Orchid turn their attention back to Lisa. The queen is still frozen watching Roland die, and her powerless stare is broken by the prattling sisters. Faced with 4 black eyes and 244 serrated teeth, the giant bitch hyena finds her wits and growls in display. Despite Lisa's most menacing form, however, the daughters aren't intimidated, and they twitter in their stance, preparing for a lunge. But before they can launch at the queen, Roland collapses onto Taelyn, pinning her like their already departed Jago. Now vulnerable herself, the Omega lets out a series of panicked squawks, never releasing her fanged grip. For a moment, it seems as if the king may prevail, but the daughters are quick to respond and deploy their weaponry at whatever is left of Roland's life force. His eyes rolling back, the king has no strength to fight off the blitzing shadows. Taking pleasure in his demise, the wolfish sisters crisscross his stomach, rupturing his upturned torso. Lisa holds her scowled disposition while Roland's body is opened in front of her. The shock of his slaughter is beyond the queen's comprehension, and she cannot think past this moment. Her expression finally collapses when the wolves begin wriggling with his intestines. King Roland is dead, and she must save herself this time. Lisa's hurried escape is caught by the Phoenix, but Taelyn and the others do not give chase. Free from entrapment, the Omega could follow the queen's heavy bush trail, but the loss of Jago gives her restraint. Shaken by her alpha's demise, Jazz screeches at Roland's hollow body, and then slashes at the dead king feverishly. More sullen in her sorrow, Orchid delicately rubs against the still wolf's remains and grieves for her sister's lost love. Her instinctual fears proven, Taelyn returns to the water and rinses mammal blood off her obsidian feathers. The phoenix red spheres once again flickering with whitish impurity, the Omega resolves to purge the pack of this place. A peculiar aspect of Calto is a lack of true carrion. On the steppe or anywhere else in Cairo, when a body dies, it decays and draws scavengers. The same cannot be said for the Crescent Valley, however, and bodies will stay fresh, albeit dead, until they are incinerated by Red's blazing maelstrom. I cannot say whether this eerie preservation is made possible by the land, or something conjured by its magical inhabitants. Regardless, the organic matter of Calto's gardeners inevitably becomes one with their sacred soil. For a time, this reality of the Jade Diamond kept the wolves alive, for it was not long after the Brookside incident that the Lystrosaurus began retreating to the caves. When that happened, the pack was forced to return to their hollowed kills and deploy their specialized teeth on tougher tissue. Gloss, on the other hand, rots in Calto. A few cycles into the Listro hibernation, the Crescent Valley's vibrant but uniform green has been replaced by an equally stunning mosaic of red, yellow, and orange. With plenty of Listro leftovers, the pack is essentially unimpacted, but the same is not true for Zai. Taelyn has been actively monitoring the Margosaurus nest and can tell that the male has no interest in the multicolored foliage. In fact, Zai chose to abandon Calto in search of greener pastures, leaving Katie to fend for herself and their clutch of eggs. Zai's exodus reminds the Omega that the pack's time in the Jade Diamond, now molten ruby, is fleeting. They won't have food much longer, and without Jago, they will lose the Phoenix. Securing an Alpha is their mission now, and that means finally getting out of here. The time to leave arrives with the winds. There is a palpable dryness in the air, and the fleshy green grass has become brittle with cardinal and gold. Sporadic gusts unify into a singular wave of invisible energy, and its power kicks up fallen leaves as if they were dust and in a push broom. The disruptive force coils in from above and forms a swirling vortex around the valley. Flurries pass like piranha through the grass, amputating leaves into a cloud of tree blood. The crowd-like wave progressively makes its way down to the central meadow, the red fury vortex drawing closer with each successive revolution. It is an otherworldly disturbance, and Taelyn's anxiety has prepared her for this moment. The Omega's hippocampal amygdala partnership has been active since Green extinguished, and Taelyn has kept the pack close to Calto's opening in anticipation of something like this. Calmly, mother and daughters make their way out of the valley, safely escaping the vortex as it rims the meadow. Turning the Phoenix away from encroaching chaos, Taelyn focuses her red spheres on their step and their mission ahead. Regretfully, the female Amatosaurus does not enjoy the same moment of triumph. Katie has nested herself into a corner and has no move but to protect her eggs. They are well covered in a mound of earth, but the mother-to-be will not abandon them. When the storming brush hits the valley floor, Katie's alcove shields her from the flying debris. The development offers an initial sense of relief, and she is able to look inside the blustery squall. Within the eye of the storm, Katie can see a brilliant color breaking through. But it isn't red or yellow flickering before her eyes, it's blue. A blue as electric as eclipse. Sparking in the heart of Calto like a beating brain, Katie is enchanted by the drama of the central meadow and is startled when it cracks. The gyrating sphere abruptly doubles in size before immediately retracting to baseline. Thunder rolling after lightning, the release of energy ripples through the air, creating a loud shock wave. The shuddering sound closes Katie's eyes, and when she opens them, the pricked female can see that the swirling leaves are now aflame. Invigorated by Calto's rich oxygen deposits, the fire spreads quickly. The downward spiral of leaf litter is matched by an upward swirl of flames, twisting out of the valley like a sun-fired python. Katie's view of the kinetics is obstructed by a layer of smoke, but she can feel Red's heat closing in. Sucking wind drives into the fiery cauldron, replacing the air with heavy black plumes. The fire approaches the alcove, and Katie struggles for breath. Composed but coughing, the Imagosaurus rings her tailed body around her clutch, bracing herself for the inevitable. Clinging tightly to her mound, eyes closed and lungs burning, she can feel the surface of her skin begin to bubble. But it isn't pain that washes over her mind, it's relief. She is where she is needed most, and if that means the end of her journey, so be it. Finally, Red breaks through the smoky curtain and wraps its fire blanket around the mother. Taking her for its own, Calto burns. Throughout the Crescent Valley, every cave and crevice is filled with scorching heat. No nook or cranny is spared, and the flames singe the once green countryside into a blackened wasteland. The fire rages for multiple cycles, purifying Calto's surface until all available fuel is exhausted. Charred but cleansed, smoke will rise from the smoldering earth until the first flakes of white. Returning to the nest, Katie's body has completely vanished. The fire burnt her flesh and bones to dust, but her mound remains. Sauropods like a Mosasaurus lay their eggs near geothermal vents, and in their mother's well-built fortress, Katie's unborn babies are safe. Packed earth prevented the embryos from boiling in their shells, and the injection of heat will keep the eggs warm through Calto's winter. In total, she laid 20, and in the garden of soil, all but one will hatch.